The golden age of nuclear power. The mid-1960s marked the dawn of a new era. Humanity was looking for a way to power a rapidly modernizing world, and the answer seemed to lie within the atom. In 1965, a major milestone was reached in France. The first commercial nuclear reactor at Chinon officially went online. It wasn't just a technical achievement, it was the starting gun for a global race. At that time, the promise of nuclear energy was simple. It would provide electricity, too cheap to meter, fueling an endless future of progress. But the real explosion in growth happened in the 1970s. In 1973, the world was hit by the Great Oil Crisis. As oil prices skyrocketed and energy security became a matter of national survival, Western nations realized they could no longer depend solely on fossil fuels. In 1974, France launched the ambitious Mesmer Plan, a massive project to shift the entire country's power grid to nuclear. This decision transformed France into a global nuclear powerhouse, a title it still holds today. During these years, huge cooling towers began to rise across the horizons of the United States, Europe, and Japan. By the late 70s, nuclear energy had reached its industrial maturity. In the United States, hundreds of reactors were planned or under construction, and the Soviet Union was rapidly expanding its own atomic program. The atmosphere was one of absolute optimism. Nuclear power was seen as the cleanest, safest, and most modern solution to the world's thirst for energy. For 15 years, the nuclear bar chart only knew one direction: straight up. However, as 1979 drew to a close, a single event in Pennsylvania would soon change public perception forever. But for now, the world was riding the crest of an atomic wave. This was the era of the Great Boom. Maturity and the Great Shock. As the 1980s opened, nuclear energy was no longer an experiment, it was a global giant. In nations like the United States, France, and the Soviet Union, production was hitting record-breaking highs every year. Nuclear power plants had become the silent heartbeat of modern civilization, providing a massive, steady flow of electricity that fueled the digital revolution and industrial growth. It was an era of supreme technical confidence. Engineers believed they had finally mastered the ultimate energy source, turning the power of the stars into a domestic utility. But this era of absolute stability was about to be shattered. On April 26, 1986, the unthinkable happened: the Chernobyl disaster. This wasn't just a technical failure. It was a global trauma that fundamentally altered our psychological relationship with the atom. The radioactive cloud that drifted across Europe didn't just carry isotopes, it carried doubt. For the first time, the invisible risks of nuclear power became a terrifying reality for millions. The fallout was political as much as it was environmental, leading to a massive wave of distrust that would last for generations. The shockwaves of Chernobyl sparked a massive public backlash. Protests erupted in every major capital, and the environmental movement found its strongest rallying cry. In 1987, following a historic national referendum, Italy made the radical decision to shut down its entire nuclear program, becoming one of the first nations to officially retreat from the atomic age. Across the West, from Germany to the United States, construction of new reactors slowed to a crawl. Stricter safety regulations, combined with rising costs and public opposition, turned nuclear projects into political and financial nightmares. Yet, while the West entered a period of nuclear winter, a different story was unfolding in the East. Nations like Japan and South Korea, lacking their own natural resources, continued to expand their programs. They viewed nuclear energy not as a choice, but as a vital necessity for industrial survival. By the time we reached the end of the 1990s, the world was deeply divided. Some nations were dismantling their cooling towers, while others were quietly building the foundations for a new Asian energy superpower. The century closed on a note of complex reality. The dream of energy too cheap to meter had been replaced by a global debate on safety, waste, and the true cost of progress. uninterrupted renaissance. As the new millennium dawned, the global conversation around energy began to shift. The world was waking up to the urgent reality of climate change and the desperate need to reduce carbon emissions. Suddenly, nuclear power was no longer seen only through the lens of the past, but as a potential savior for the future. This was the start of the so-called nuclear renaissance. Governments from Washington to London began revisiting atomic energy, rebranding it as the essential, green, bridge to a sustainable world. New, advanced reactor designs promised higher efficiency and even greater safety. In the mid-2000s, optimism was so high that even skeptical nations paused their phase-out plans. However, the movement wasn't universal. In 2000, Germany made a historic move by announcing its Energiewende, a massive energy transition aimed at eventually closing all its nuclear plants. It was a bold gamble, setting the stage for a deep ideological divide within Europe that remains to this day. But the true breaking point for this renaissance came on March 11, 2011. A massive earthquake and a devastating tsunami struck the coast of Japan, leading to the disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. The world watched in horror as one of the most technologically advanced nations struggled to contain a triple meltdown. In an instant, the nuclear renaissance was halted. Japan silenced its entire fleet, and the global momentum for new reactors vanished, replaced once again by fear, uncertainty, and a radical rethink of our energy future. The rise of China and energy realism. In the wake of Fukushima, the West fell into a deep period of reflection, but in the East, a new giant was stirring. From 2012 onwards, the center of gravity for nuclear energy shifted decisively toward China. With an insatiable thirst for power and a desperate need to clean its smog-filled skies, Beijing launched the most ambitious nuclear expansion in human history. Year after year, China connected new reactors to its grid at a pace never seen before, rapidly climbing the global rankings to challenge the decades-long supremacy of France and the United States. While China surged ahead, the rest of the world entered an era of energy realism. The growing threat of the climate crisis forced many to realize that wind and solar alone might not be enough to reach net zero. By the early 2020s, the conversation changed again. The global energy crisis, triggered by geopolitical instability and the war in Ukraine, proved that energy independence was a matter of national security. Suddenly, nations like the UK, Poland, and even Japan began to reconsider the atom, not out of old-fashioned optimism, but out of cold, hard necessity. By 2023, the nuclear landscape had been completely redrawn. Germany finalized its exit, shutting down its last 3 reactors, while Finland started up Olkiluoto 3, the most powerful reactor in Europe. We reached the end of this period with a world that finally understood. The transition to a carbon-free future would be far more complex, and more dependent on nuclear power, than anyone had imagined just a decade prior. Towards a new era. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new atomic age. From the massive expansion in China to the resurgence of American innovation, nuclear power is reclaiming its role. By 2026, as AI and global demand push our grids to the limit, the race for clean, stable energy will only intensify. The question is no longer if we need nuclear, but who will lead the charge.